Hello, and welcome to the award-winning Ed Brown Show. I'm your host, Kamari Richmond, and we have a wonderful show for you this evening. We are talking to Mr. David Grogan, and he is a devoted father, Marine, advocate, health and wellness. We're really going to talk about that. Welcome, David, back to the Ed Brown Show.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be back.
Well, I'm glad to have you back.
It's such a pleasure to be back. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about.
Yes, we do. We always do.
I know, right? So you have, your background is very impressive. So let's start to the beginning. We're going to talk about, he's running for Bowie Senate, City Council. Let me correct myself. District 3. So we'll get that out. But start from the beginning of where you started and where you, well, we'll talk about the segment. We'll talk about the campaign, but talk us what led you to politics.
Later in my federal law enforcement career, toward the latter years, I started learning more about politics because my interests had started changing. I've always had an interest in business, so I've always done something else other than law enforcement. I used to run probably the largest natural health and wellness show in the country, right here at Bowie State. And as I started getting older, I started wanting to know more about things. And I quickly learned that politics controls everything. And I quickly realized that I didn't know enough. I didn't know the people. I didn't know the players. I didn't know how things worked. And so when I started doing research, I was baffled that I don't think the average person actually knows that our politicians are actually our community leaders. And then to learn that people are in political positions that have no background in leadership. And then as I started exploring more, that just became concerning to me. I said, wait a minute, how, you can research on some of these people and their background, a lot of them are in positions that they have no qualifications. And it's because we generally don't know, most of us have very little knowledge about politics, and that's why I wanted to enhance my knowledge. And as I became more astute in political politics, I decided that I need to position myself to help us out.
And you, I want to laugh a little bit because we're talking about people that have no qualifications.
Yes.
that are in politics at the moment. I'm excited about 2019 and 2012 and what's coming up for this country.
Yes.
Things have changed so drastically that we need people to stand up, show up, and really do their part. So you are an activist.
I am an activist and an advocate.
And an advocate. And I know children really touch your heart. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I've always been an activist and advocate. An activist in certain areas and an advocate in other areas, and sometimes they overlap. But my passion is children. And so I've always been an advocate for children's rights. I've always been a strong advocate for fathers' rights. I've always been a strong advocate and activist for fair parenting, because I think these are the core things that have the most profound impact on our community. Unless we ensure that our kids are safe, one, and happy and healthy. Safe, happy, and healthy. Having those things in place will eliminate a lot of the other social ills that we see. And I became a really strong fair parenting advocate because I think we have a system that isn't fair. I think we have a system that creates a lot of the social ills that we have. Because if a child is brought into this world, children love both of their parents, regardless of what the parents think of each other, regardless of whether the parents are married, whether the parents are divorced. A child knows a mother and a father, and a child feels both parents. And if you don't have a system in place to ensure that the child is entitled to what I consider the civil rights, and a civil right is a right to have access to both parents unless there is a legitimate reason that someone else can prove that a child should not have equal access to a parent. So that's one of the things that I really that I really became a very strong voice and a very strong advocate for. And then oddly enough, I'm also a very strong activist and an advocate for police accountability. I am a professional law enforcement person. I am a cop. Sometimes people get confused with these different titles. You know, I'm a retired supervisory deputy United States Marshal. That just means federal agent. That just means cop, badge, guns. And so, but it's a federal, not local and state. But I can say, I know I'm different. I'm a different kind of cop. One, I'm a good cop. And I am an activist or an advocate against bad cops. And I became that because my perspective on policing is a lot different than the average person who becomes a cop or becomes a law enforcement person. I spent my career in a leadership or manager. So I've managed local, state, and federal law enforcement for over 23 years. So I don't have some of the same mentalities that you would find in an average law enforcement, not average, but some of what we see today. I have an oversight of a manager, almost like a parent that deals with kids that has to manage them. And so my perspective is different. So I love cops, I love good cops, but I totally despise a bad cop, whether it's state, local, or federal.
Right. So I want to go back to children, and then I want to pick back up on being the top cop. So when you talk about children, what kind of programs would you like to see so that that they do become more healthy, happy, more balanced? Because we're in a society where balance is key. So the children are either on social media or in their phones, in those games. They are completely plugged in to something else. And sometimes the parents are not plugged in. And so there's that disconnect of what's going on with the child.
Absolutely. Let me say this. I have visited schools all over the world. I have visited probably just about every private school in the DMV. And I've sort of studied schooling because when I've traveled for work, when the average person is interested in going to the museums and different things like that, I've been to museums all over the world, but anytime I get an opportunity, I always ask, is there any way I can visit a school? I spent a week in Dominican Republic on a school field trip with my daughter, which was probably one of the most profound, most exciting experience I'd ever had, a full week with kids in Dominican Republic at a school, and I was at the school all day. So I've developed a perspective, and I've always said perspective is derived from experience. And for children have to be exposed, and exposure is everything. And I think that in this day and time, even I think our elected officials, our community leaders, I think they have to take a more active role. Give an example. Flotus Obama, she opened the White House to people who never imagined ever going into the White House. Why?
Absolutely.
That was intentional. It was intentional to expose children to things that were unimaginable. Teaching kids about health, wellness, the role of food, how you grow food, different things like that. She took an active role in that. And we can do that on every level. We have a beautiful city hall that sits right here in Bowie, beautiful. And we could do that. There's no reason why every student that graduates from a school in Bowie have not had a tour of City Hall. Elementary school, middle school, high school should have had a visit to City Hall, because if you expose kids to these things, that gets their minds turning. Now they're interested. Now they want to know, because not all of them are going to find them. Some of them are not going to enjoy it. They're not going to like it. But if you expose them to it, now you have them asking questions. What is this? You know, what is the city council? Why are they doing this? Because kids, they naturally gravitate toward wanting, they want to know.
Right.
They want to know. So we have to expose them, and we have to take a special interest in them. And that's something I've always done. I've always taken a special interest in kids. Most of the schools in Prince George's County, the guidance counselors have me on speed dial, because I've been visiting our schools for over 25 years for career days and other different things that I've done with our schools and our kids, because I think that's important.
Now, how do we reach out to parents to kind of get them involved? Now, some parents are hands-on. They're going to be at every conference, every meeting, but then we have those parents that, you know what, they don't know how to.
Yeah, and that's very important. We have to recognize what the real issue is and not be afraid. And one of the core issues is the parents. And so we have generations of parents, and I'm not going to say don't or do not know how to parent, but our parents need help.
Right.
My parents need help. Their parents. We had generations of people that need help. So in the 21st century, I think that we have to take a more assertive effort to help parents. And I'm not suggesting that I would do this, but I would give you one example. The average parent has no idea that they should show up for their kids' PTA meetings. They have no idea why they should show up for their sports. If your kid is playing basketball, football, ballet, anything a child is doing, children need the support of the parent, the family members, the people that are showing up. But sometimes parents assume that you send the kids to school and that's it. So one of the things that I would propose, not necessarily suggest, but just as an idea, when the kids come to school, the kids should take home a letter with something that outlines a parent's responsibility that they have to sign off on. Because now we're not assuming, because I think we make assumption that everyone knows what to do.
Absolutely.
We should tell them, and then we should hold them accountable. If you expect this from a teacher, here is what we expect from you. 1, we expect you to show up at the PTA meetings. 2, we expect you to ensure that your children gets their proper rest. 3, their proper nutrition. And here's what they need. And here's what they don't need. We can take it even a step further. We can tell them what they need to do, and we can also tell them what they don't need to do. And then invite them to things. I think I heard a speaker say one time, maybe we need to take the title PTA off of it and call it something else. Because I think when people think PTA, for whatever reason, it's not attractive. So maybe we need to change the language. Something to get them to understand that it's important for them to show up on parents' night out, and then the schools, and then the principals. We need to get creative in how. And then once we engage them, now we're going to educate them. We're going to provide them information. Give them statistics. Have them understand, you know, even when relationships go bad, divorce, okay, so now here's the child needs counseling. Y'all need counseling. Different things like that, that a lot of parents will assume they know, but they have no idea.
And there are a lot of challenges, but there are places where you can get help.
Yes.
But either you have access to where you know how to get these programs, or you don't. And so I do agree, as a teacher or a guidance counselor or a principal, you have to reach out.
You have
to the parent and to the child. I mean, when the child comes to you and say, I'm having a problem, you can't just, you know what, you need to talk to your parents. But how about, you know, I have someone that you can talk to. But then how do you get parents, let's say, you know what, I think that your child needs therapy, or I think they need help. Will you sign off on that for school?
Absolutely. Well, one thing, we need to have more counselors in school.
Right.
And I think we need to enforce, a good friend of mine, Linda Diaz, she passed legislation, the Lorenz Law. And I don't know the specifics of it, but the gist of the Lorenz Law is that any educator who comes in contact with the child would have had some kind of counseling training. Because when children are in trouble, psychologically, emotionally, one of the first people they turn to is teachers in school and guidance counselors. So if the teachers don't recognize signs, I've been in schools sometimes, and every time I go into a school, I can just see things in children that are being ignored. That somebody in that classroom should recognize that something is wrong, and someone should be asking that child, are you okay? Do we need to talk? So that's why we need more counselors in the school. There needs to be funding to ensure that every school has adequate trained counselors.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, our teachers need the training that's involved with the Lorenz Law. And the Lorenz Law needs to be enforced because it's a very critical piece of legislation. And it's an unfortunate, it comes out of an unfortunate situation. Lauren committed suicide. And she was bullied at school. And the teachers, no one understood, no one, and the mom didn't know, and mom is Linda Diaz. And instead, her mom transformed that pain into something healthy, to become an advocate, to get a law passed in her daughter's name, Lorenz Law. Very important piece of legislation that you should not go to any school. You should be able to ask any counselor or any teacher, are you familiar with the Lorenz Law? and definitely any principal. Because the Lorenz Law, again, I guess that's the law enforcement side of me.
Right.
We should be enforcing the law.
Right.
If that's the law, we need enforcement, right? So, yeah.
Well, you know what? That's very interesting, and I want to ask you some more about children and health care when we get to that next segment. But did you ever envision yourself getting into politics?
I didn't. You know, I never thought about it until later years because I was always I was a sports person. You know, I was the average person. You know, and see, I want to believe that. See, in the next generation, we want to make education a new sport. Yes. And you see, that's what I like to see. And so I was a sports person, and one thing I know about sports people, there's not. They're not thinking about some of the other things, you know. Because imagine if we transform all that energy that we put into Dallas and the Redskins, and then we take all of that energy and put it in community activism, community advocacy, and things like that. And I think that's something that we have to do with our kids, you know. And so, because once I realized the importance of it, it's very difficult for me, even on the Sunday now, to watch the games when I know that, especially in the campaigning right now, I'm in the campaign mode. There's too much to do campaign-wise for me to sit and watch sports and football for 8, 16, 12 hours. And so once I reached that level where I knew the importance of it, I have just been focused ever since.
Yeah, you've been very active.
Yes.
Very, very active. And that kind of takes me to sports and children. So this helps them to develop a set of skills that will help them in life?
Yes. I fully support sports. It's necessary. Children need to learn how to become team players. Children need to learn how to accept wins and losses. There is so much to be gained in sports, but it has to be kept in perspective. And there has to be more, and not to say it's the coach's responsibility, because the coach's responsibility is to win. That's it. That the coach is being paid to win. So we can't give coaches other responsibilities and burdens, but someone else has to take an interest in the children in their other parts of their development. Because they do need it, I think kids should be required to play sports. Sports of choice, whatever they choose, and I guess PE and gym may be required because there's so many skills. Because if a kid becomes an adult and they've never played sports, not that there's anything wrong with them, but they're missing a skill set that if their counterparts have played sports, they get to work, they understand teams. It's one of the things that I liked about law enforcement. One of the things that drove me into law enforcement because I played football my whole life. I played high school football, I played college football at Bowie State. And law enforcement is similar to that. Use that group camaraderie and all of that. That's what I enjoyed about it. So I fully support sports. I'm not sure that if I were recommending someone, or a child, if I had a son or my nephews, that contact collision sports to the head, I'm not a proponent of that at all. That's a choice. I did it, but it's not something that I would recommend because the collisions to the heads and the size and the speed of children nowadays are they could potentially be deadly in the end.
What do you think is the difference? What do you think happened for that to get to this point? Like back in the day, like you said, you know what? It was just normal. But what do you think happened in society that said, you know what? We have to work or look at these concussions?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things that happen. On one end, I heard on the news the other day that some of the schools are having a difficult time staffing football. I think some of the major schools, high schools, they have a tough time. I mean, that's because of social media and society has changed and kids have different interests. They're not as active. But the concussion piece always concerned me, and I would encourage any parent who's considering football or boxing, any kind of contact sport, to actually watch the movie Concussion. Concussion.
Great movie.
That's a great movie.
Yes,
and I tell you, I'm not the most emotional person in the world, but watching movies, but I can tell you that movie brought me to tears. And it brought me to tears because I could relate to it. When they show what happens to the brain with these collisions, and then now to look at these football players who were megastars in high school and college, on to pros, all pro football players. Now these people are handicapped. Now they're
Right.
dying. Some of them could barely move.
Right.
And that movie actually shows what happens to the brain. And all I could think about is I was known for a collision. I was a vicious inside linebacker. And anybody that's ever dealt with me or been around me, they know. And anybody that's ever played against me, they know. And so for me to witness that and to see what I have potentially done to my own brain, it's hard for me to support any type of collision type of sports.
And I have a doctor who I'm close with, and she is in, it's not Prince George's County, it's another county. It'll come back to me.
Anne Arundel, Howard, Montgomery.
Somewhere like that. But that was one of the things she ran on and was trying to pass a bill.
Oh,
was
that's in
on,
Virginia.
No, she's not Virginia.
I
Oh,
remember that legislation.
Dr.
Yeah.
Hill.
We'll find
It'll
out,
come to
but I think I
it'll come
saw
to
it,
me.
yeah.
But that was something she really wanted to work on, and she was getting some pushback.
Oh, yeah, so
from
much
that.
money, yeah. Because it's so much money. Everything is just capitalism. It's driven by money. So I remember that legislation that she was pushing, or that sort of platform she ran on, getting those contact sports out of for little younger kids,
Right.
which I would have supported. Those kids don't need, their brains are just developing. There's no way they should be taking on these collisions to their heads. And then how did she say she did pretty well with that?
We haven't talked in a while, so I'm not sure, but she
yeah.
was on the news talking about it. And there was a lot of pushback for people that are really heavy into
yeah.
sports. Like, you can't tell my kid
You can't play football.
that they can't play
All right.
football. They can't play a contact sport. But what would you like to see done with children in Prince George's County? And I want to harp on that because you are such a strong advocate for children.
Here's what I like to see done. I like to see us create a position at whatever level, but their sole responsibility is coordinating field trips.
Okay.
Because like I said, I have visited private schools all over the DMV, probably every one of them, in fact. And the biggest difference is those kids go on field trips. I work downtown D.C. I watch school buses pull up to museums daily. I watch school buses pull up to the Capitol daily,
Right.
and watch these kids come out. And not too often, most often they don't look like us. And I don't know how much it would cost, how difficult it would be to coordinate. Our kids need to go back, because I think we went on field trips when I grew up. There has to be a way
yeah.
to get there, because I'm a firm believer that exposure is everything. I watch kids, and here's the other piece as far as politics. Kids that are in private schools, they visit the State House, they lobby on issues,
Yes.
and so they're learning in high school, in middle school, because they come up with whatever the issue is. They need funding, they need this. They actually do fundraisers. They're in private schools, they're fundraising every day. Why is that significant now? When they become adults, a fundraiser is not a foreign language to them.
Right.
So now, because it's very difficult for candidates, new candidates, to get involved because it's all money driven, then it's very difficult to raise money because the average middle class or working class person is not into the idea of investing into candidates, because again, it's not something they were exposed to. And so exposure is everything.
It is. It's everything. And that brings to me, I don't remember her last name, but her name was Greta. And you probably saw her. She went on the Hill talking about climate change and what we are doing right now, because life for them is going to be very different.
Very different.
In 10, 15, 20 years.
Right.
And so becoming now, she's an advocate now, very passionate, on the Hill, telling these congresswomen and men, you know what? This is your fault if you don't fix it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, and so that's one. Climate change is one of the hot issues, and we visit once a year on Capitol Hill, and oddly enough, The League of Women Voters are primarily seniors, and to watch them, they get so excited about this day on the Hill. They have a day on the Hill, which I usually go every year.
Okay.
And of course, I'm one of very few guys,
Right.
but they're all seniors. So, and they figure out, and on a nice day, we could be walking from different parts of Capitol Hill. And I say that to say our kids should have a day on the Hill, if not a day in Annapolis, if not a day at City Hall. Because
Right.
again, it's exposure.
And it's really important. I think the more we talk about it, I mean, politics now, it's everything.
Everything. But there's a reason for that now.
Everything.
When you say now, why do you think that? Now, politics now is everything because of our current president.
Absolutely.
So as a person I'm an optimist, and I see good in everything. And the good that I see in this particular president is that he has woken America up. We're now paying attention to things that we should have been paying attention to generations ago.
Right.
We should have been concerned generations ago who the FBI director is, who the Secretary of Education is, what an executive order is. All of these things that are hot button items now, impeachment, all these things that we're concerned about now, our worlds would have been a lot different if we had been concerned about those things generations ago.
And this has never happened
Right.
before. This is completely new to the country. And you make a valid point. A lot of times people don't vote in the primary. And they think, oh, I'm just going to vote in the general election. But you need to know that your congressperson, the judge, that's all going to make a big difference
Politics is local.
on politics. So
Yes.
the president, well, this president thinks he can do everything. But for the most part, you have to have that balance.
Yes, yes.
And I
We
think
should be
people are
more
waking up to
excited.
that.
We should be more excited about voting in local elections, or equally excited, not necessarily more, but we should be equally excited about voting in the
Equally.
local elections as we are with the presidential election. All politics are local. The things that affect our daily lives happens with local politics. But because, again, we want to believe, or we don't necessarily understand the process, so the presidential election gets more attention. And so I guess with the media and everything. But I think if we get our young people, I believe in young people,
Yes.
I believe in kids. And if we get our young people to understand early on the importance of civic involvement, by getting civics back in our school, by the way. We have to get
How
civics
about
back.
that?
How about we start there?
How about that, right?
We've got to get civics, because one of the reasons why we're not interested and why we don't vote is because we become adults and we've never learned anything about the process. So now it's not interesting to us. And then we're too proud to admit. See, I was never too proud to admit I knew absolutely nothing about any of this.
Right.
But when I realized I didn't know anything about it, I made a concerted effort to learn. And now that I do know, I'm going to stay in this game.
Absolutely.
I'm going to be running for office and knocking on doors and doing everything.
Right, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.